Jack Boland has literally changed the lives of thousands of people, and he can help you change yours. The following lessons are designed to give you the information and inspiration you need to make your life what it can be. This program is entitled The Mastermind Principle. And now, Jack Boland.
What a marvelous thing to look out upon this large audience gathered here this 4th of July day, this special day in our year, a day in which we acknowledge and celebrate a certain kind of freedom that was established here in this nation. Freedom must be established. Your spiritual freedom is a thing that already exists. It has been given you, but it must be established by you in your own consciousness, in your own experience. No one can give you the freedom that your heart desires. It must arise from within yourself. I really believe with all my heart that the subject that we will be speaking about in this series of 3 lectures is one of the most important that you and I could possibly share together, because it's about a system of thought that will give us a dimension of freedom heretofore undreamed of. You were born into the freedom that was given you by this great nation, those civil liberties. But that spiritual freedom, again, must come, and it must arise within your own mind. Mind, the power that molds and makes. And man is mind. Evermore he takes the tools of thought and, shaping what he wills, brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, but it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. Your outer life, those situations that surround you, these are but the mirror of your mind. You can look outside yourself and behold there what you've been experiencing inside yourself. And if you do not see the changes that are desired by your heart, it's only because you have not yet taken the tools of thought. And what are these tools of thought? Thinking and feeling. The 2 possible actions of the mind. And when they're used righteously, when we put them together, we can form from these 2 activities of our mind any combination of events, experiences, conditions, or circumstances that we can possibly conceive of. The dictionary defines mind as the spirit of consciousness, and defines spirit as that which constitutes one's unseen, intangible being, or the animating force in living beings. And in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary by Charles Fillmore, he defines spirit as God as the moving force in the universe, and spirit as the breath of life in all creation, the principle of creative intelligence and life. Sometimes you and I discover in a moment here or a moment there within ourselves a flow of thought that somehow has seemed to evolve independently of the reasoning process. Have you not had such a moment recently when something happened inside yourself and you had not thought it? It was there and it was above your thought and you had not felt it per se, and yet you had the feeling of it, but it transcended the normalcy of your days and of your nights. And sometimes we're puzzled about this experience, about its origin and its safety as a guide. Sometimes it's almost frightening. Now, in its beginnings, this seemingly strange source of knowledge is turned aside as a daydream or a fleeting thought, perhaps well used, but not truly believing that we can establish a conscious and continuing contact with the source of that wisdom or inspiration or power or strength or beauty. But if this experience arises within us at all, then certainly it is of us, natural to us, available, and in its development, the individual can attain a greater capacity to know himself and to understand the purpose of his creation, the purpose of his experience upon the earth. Have you not often wondered why you are here? What is the meaning of my life, the purpose of my life? And the normal intellectual process will not reveal to you that purpose. But there is nothing that the Spirit would withhold from its creation, and you are its own special, beloved creation. There is a supermind. There really is. A mastermind, a Christ mind, a superconsciousness. And the Christ consciousness is the mind that knows all and is able to accomplish all things that it knows. And it can do this because it is one with the mind of God. It is the mind of God expressing as the experience in man. And the very few people who begin to suspect that they can establish a conscious contact with the mastermind still do not know how to make their personal connection with this power that is greater than themselves. First, I must know that I can. But then how? How am I, an individual, a puny little human being upon this earth, how am I to establish my conscious relationship with the source of all good? And the purpose of these lessons is to give us a basic understanding, first of the nature of mind, the nature of this experience, how the supermind can and does function within us at our level, at the human level, and then to give each one of us a practical system that will connect us to this higher consciousness and to its creative power, so that you can use what creativity is bringing to you. You can use it in your world and in your life. All genius is the result of man being in touch with this fourth dimension of wisdom and power. And you are a genius. Did you know that? You are a genius discovering yourself, and you are truly a genius in the sense of Einstein. There's nothing known to him that is not known to your own superconscious self. Now, in the beginning, it may be difficult for you to believe this, and that's the major problem in experiencing genius. Genius does not come from you. It comes through you. Genius is not something that originates in our human identity, but it comes through us from our spiritual identity. Webster defines genius as exceptional or transcendent intellectual and creative power. And genius comes from a Latin word meaning guardian spirit. Guardian spirit. Think of that. You have a genius, a guardian spirit. There's that word again. Spirit. A presence, a power, an intelligence, but more than that, the divine activity of God that is already fired up. You don't have to turn spirit on, meaning to cause it to be. It is. And it is in you and around you, and it created you specifically so that it could move into action upon this earth. It is we who hold back, not spirit. It is ourselves that we have to get turned on, not spirit. We do not have to coerce this universal activity to perform its work, it is eager and anxious and ready and able and willing to move into action in your experience in every facet of your life the moment that you can begin to believe it and fulfill the conditions, because the conditions of spirit must be fulfilled in the mind of the individual. And Jesus expressed this in many ways, and one of his statements was to the effect that he was not an exception to the law, but the fulfillment of the law of life, the law of spirit. A student asked me earlier this week, she said, in getting in touch with my individuality, that spiritual identity, as opposed to my personality, am I getting in touch with my genius? And of course the answer is yes. Genius is something that we all have. It's a common denominator of Homo sapiens, but only to be found in our spiritual nature. But it is there. And then she asked, well, how do I get in touch with this side of my nature? And in the next lesson, I'll give you a surefire system of establishing and maintaining that relationship. That'll get you back, won't it? But in this lesson, we need to continue to prepare our minds so that we can then more completely involve ourselves. If we understand what we're doing, then when we move into the how to do it, we're better prepared to move into that kind of activity. Now, when you and I begin to concentrate all of our faculties on these fourth dimension ideas, the conscious mind, that's the mind that you and I were using probably when we came in this beautiful auditorium this evening, the conscious mind. The conscious mind and the superconscious mind begin to blend. The conscious mind is the fourth dimensional mind. That's the mind that we function with here in the normalcy of life. But the superconscious mind, the Christ mind, is of the kingdom of all good, the kingdom of heavens, the kingdom of God, the fourth dimension. And sitting where you are, in all probability in this hour, you will feel a movement of spiritual energy into yourself. You'll feel something happening. An intelligence, a power, a super normalcy will be your experience in some facet of your being. And then the normal faculties receive new powers to express themselves. And it's in this manner that your whole life and your whole world are renewed and changed and lifted up and restored. Now, the superconsciousness, or the Christ consciousness, is a person's only sure guide through the maze of the creative process, through life on this earth. And by trusting the infallibility of this guide, if you and I know that we are trusting the mind of God in us, not another spirit, not another person, not another teacher like myself. You're not trusting me, but the spirit of you, the activity of God within yourself. Then you have the freedom to open yourself to the inspiration of the Almighty, the infinite presence of God within yourself. The connection between the superconscious mind and the conscious mind is established within ourselves. You are where you meet God. You are where you meet God. God is within you. This is where the experience takes place, within ourselves. You are the time and space continuum in which the movement, the activity of spirit takes place. You see, we've been going to have this happen at some future time in some future place then. But there is no then in the experience that we're seeking. It is now, and it is here. It is where I am is. I am is in the midst of me. I am is the universal source of power and wisdom, and I am that I am. Now, this connection is made through the process that we call meditation, going into the silence, prayer and meditation, speaking the Word, and by the use of mastermind groups. Perhaps you never heard of a mastermind group. Perhaps you never heard of a mastermind connection. And perhaps this might be one reason why that you have not fully established your conscious contact with the mastermind or the Christ mind. Life provides us with many kinds of mastermind groups that fall naturally into our experience. And this happens for our development, for our growth. Yet most people will say, well, I never heard of a mastermind group. I really don't know what you're talking about, Jack. There are many people that have never heard of diamonds in America, and yet they've been discovered here. Someone down in Arkansas a few years ago threw a rock away about the size of their fist. And someone else picked it up and examined it, and you'll never guess what it was. A diamond about the size of your fist. It wasn't a rock at all. Our real diamonds already exist in our own backyard, but they must be discovered and polished and used, not abused. Let me give you an example of a mastermind arrangement. Our system of government was formed as a mastermind group. But over the years, that mastermind arrangement has deteriorated, and our government no longer functions as it did 200 years ago. A board of directors or trustees is a natural mastermind group. But as a rule, they do not know it and do not practice the mastermind principles in their meetings, and so they are not a mastermind group. But originally, this was the concept. Groups in Alcoholics Anonymous are mastermind groups, but only when they really are practicing the 12 steps. Families are a natural mastermind arrangement, but in most families, they have lost this mastermind or spiritual consciousness, and so because there's little leadership at the top. There's no one to assume the responsibility of the spiritual leadership and the bringing together of that group in the consciousness of the mastermind. Incidentally, we're born into families, to parents, that provide us with the environment that we need to grow out of. And more often than not, parents and children do not join together in each other's spiritual growth, and that's all right. But where such an arrangement does exist, it can be a very beautiful and powerful experience for the members of that mastermind consciousness. True friendship is a natural and one of the most powerful of all mastermind arrangements. In his famous book, The City of God, it was completed in 427 A.D., Augustine said that friendship was higher than any other form of human love. And he went on to say that there is a third force or self in friendship that is overwhelming in its power to affect the parties of the friendship. He said in friendship, something happens. There is another something that takes place. A higher something. Something of great power and beauty that gives dignity and wisdom and strength to the individuals when they are truly in friendship. Leslie Weatherhead, the English minister, tells a story of two friends that came to be friends during the war. And one was injured one day and could not get back to the trenches. And his friend went out to get him against his officer's orders. And the friend returned mortally wounded, and the friend he had gone to retrieve, he carried on his back, and his friend was already dead. And the officer said, "It was not worth it." But the dying man replied, It was worth it, sir. When I got to him, Jim said, I knew you would come. It was worth it. So many of our so-called friendships are not friendships at all, and therefore they are not of the mastermind. Look at how we abuse instead of use our friendships for the common good of both parties. So frequently a friend is someone to drink with and to spend long hours talking about negative things with, or just to spend idle time with. And how often has a friendship been based on the common denominator of mutual weaknesses shared? My friend is that person that I go to be weak with. Do you have any such friendships in your life? If you do, make a decision now to eliminate those friendships, because they have the power to deteriorate your life. They have great power, but it is negative power. And this is not true friendship. And I beseech you to surrender all such relationships. To thine own self, to thine own spirit be true. And then it follows as night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Marriage is a natural mastermind relationship. More often than not, it is not practiced in this manner because the mastermind principle is not understood. But any marriage that is functioning as a mastermind relationship must be a very powerful influence in the life not only of both partners, but of all people that come in contact with them. Now, in these 3 lessons, we're going to learn how to develop these natural relationships into full-blown mastermind partnerships that will dramatically turn our lives around and produce success, happiness, prosperity, those things that your heart desires. And not just outer things, the state of consciousness that your mind and heart have desired to experience. First within and then without is the universal order. The mastermind principle is not to be used primarily to acquire things, but you can acquire and should acquire all the things that you need as the result of the activity of this mighty power in your experience. And where failure or inharmony or sadness formerly existed, then the good that you seek will dramatically begin to be your experience. But we're going to do more than just take the natural mastermind relationships that already exist and turn them around and give them positive power. Each one here who chooses to do so can learn how to develop a super mastermind group of like-minded persons. How would you like to develop a small group of people, like-minded people, people that you love and enjoy and appreciate, people that with whom you experience a perfect harmony of consciousness? How would you like to develop such a group of people, and with this group of people demonstrate a whole new life, filled full of all the good that you think you've been missing? Would you like to do that? That's what we're going to do. We will do it. And you'll be amazed before you're halfway through at what will happen to you. Actually, what this principle does is to take your personal world and place it under a new government. Whose government? Yours? That's the government that you're trying to eliminate from your life, isn't it? Are you going to place it under the government of your best friend? Oh, no. If any human being is going to manage my life, I want it to be me, not my friends. But I don't want it to be either of us. Then whose government? God's government. And God's government through the mastermind. Isaiah the 9th chapter. And the government will be upon his shoulder. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. That's what I want. I want an arrangement in my life that will make it possible for me to experience the government of God in my life, in every corner of my life, on a continuing basis, so that God's power and peace and wisdom and love become my experience in every situation and relationship that exists. Would you like that? Then that's exactly what we're going to experience together. You and I are citizens of a universe whose dominant feature is motion. Motion. Movement is a basic law of nature. And if you could look into the atomic structure of this lectern, you would see movement. Movement whose velocity would be staggering. Movement. Now, if movement is a basic law of the universe, movement is therefore required of all of the parts of the universe. If it's the law of the whole thing, it's the law of the lesser segments of the universe. From the largest visible masses to the smallest atomic particles. Everything is in motion. Whether we see it or not, motion is there. Every body, by every body I mean every heavenly body that's in the universe, is going somewhere. Consequently, everybody like you and I, are going somewhere. Everything is moving from where it was to where it's going to be. Growth is movement. A flower grows because it cannot remain as it is. It cannot stop growing. It has no choice. And you cannot stop growing. You are a different kind of flower only. The difference perhaps being that in the flower the process is a natural one. It is of the nature of the flower. But you have reached the point in evolution that conscious activity is required for your growth. You and I must consciously cooperate with the creative process and with the movement and the growth. Below the level of human consciousness, there's very little choice in the direction or the velocity or the quality or the form that movement takes. A leopard cannot change its spots. It cannot. A human leopard can, but a leopard in the jungle cannot change its spots. A comet set in motion must follow and obey the forces and laws that are already established. It has no further choice in the matter. But you and I do have choices. As human beings, we represent the first or the lowest level of life where internal choices can and must be made. You and I have reached that point of evolution, of conscious evolution, where internal choices, the wisdom, the ability, the understanding to select and make choices is our responsibility. And we can change our spots. You can change your spotty performance of the past. If you have not liked, maybe it is not so much that you have disliked your performance in recent months or years, but perhaps you're just not fulfilled. Perhaps your life is not as exciting as you wanted it to be. There just is not enough movement and change and growth and activity and excitement and joy in your life. Well, you can change it. And no matter what course or trajectory has been established in your life, you have set yourself in motion just like a comet in the sky. But you can change not only the direction of that movement, but you can change the velocity of that movement. If you're a comet that has just been barely moving through the sky like one of the fireworks that I saw the other night, all the rest of them were really reaching up to the heavens. But there was one that just went, and it burst, and I wish you could have seen the people scatter. And maybe that's what's happened in our lives. Maybe we're just not really moving with the spiritual velocity that our hearts desire. But we can change that predetermined direction at a moment's notice. And we can veer off the path that is leading to certain failure or even ugly disaster and look into a course that leads to beauty and peace and health and joy and power and prosperity. And that, you think that's too good to be true? That's hardly good enough to be true for you. Don't hear that as being something, well, gosh, that's too much for me to believe. That's the least you should be able to believe. That's why I'm only saying that much. If I told you the truth about yourself, you wouldn't believe it. If I really told you what could happen to you in the next 30 days, you might turn your mind off. The problem is that most people don't know that they're going somewhere. As a matter of fact, they try very hard. They've been trained to settle down into non-movement. We're already practicing retirement 30 years before we get there. We're already creating comfort zones that we can move into that require a non-movement and a non-change and a non-growth. And this is a race consciousness, and certainly the consciousness in our time in America. Now, not knowing that non-movement does not exist, we have not yet learned that non-movement does not exist. If there's one impossible thing, it is to be without motion. You're either going to be moving forward or moving backward, and moving backward becomes stagnation. Stagnation continues to be movement. Have you ever seen a stagnant pond? Have you ever walked through a stagnant pond and felt the ooze moving up between your toes? Can't you feel it now? The little slimy, creepy, crawly things that are there. Well, when your mind becomes stagnant, that's exactly what happens. There are little creepy, crawly, oozy, slimy things there. Green. If you've got a green life, I'm talking about the kind that is like moss. It's because you've not been moving, changing, growing. You've not been excited about the possibilities. And you've not made your decision to move away from your low-vaulted past into that larger experience that Spirit has in store for you. Do you believe right now that you can change your direction a full 180 degrees and increase your velocity to the speed of light? To the speed of light. You can. You are Spirit. And you can go where you want to go. And you can be what you want to be. And you can change because you're a spiritual being. But you're a spiritual being who has reached the level of unfolding called human. And being human means that you have and now must use the power of choice. And the power of choice is defined as self-determination. What have you determined about your life recently? What have you decided about the direction that your life must take recently? Are you in motion? Really? Really in motion? Are you moving? Really? Now don't tease yourself. Oh, you say, well, I'm waiting for God to decide that. Well, I say to you that God is waiting for you to decide that. To decide what? To establish a new goal. And what is that goal? Is that goal a new automobile? Perhaps, but not really. The new goal that you and I are going to establish for ourselves is wholeness. Spiritual wholeness. To become a whole person in motion. And if we become a whole person in motion, we will draw to us by the momentum, by the velocity, by the power of that movement, we will draw into our lives everything that we need, everything that is the equivalent of our wholeness. You see, until now, our motion has tended to drift first one way and then another way. To be enthused for a little while and then devoid of hope. Have you noticed how that has a tendency to be? To find something new and to become quite excited about it, and then find out that it really wasn't as great as you thought it was. That might be a new job or a new relationship with someone of the opposite sex. And then, after a while, nothing really happened. Well, something happened, but it lost its power to inspire, to direct, or to guide your life. This kind of movement that is called vacillation, between highs and lows and ups and downs and back and forth, is the repetition of patterns of problems. And it's a great waste of spiritual energy and leads nowhere. And that's why that we have to break out into the light. And to do so, each person needs help from someone else. You and I cannot get where we want to go in the universe without help. You cannot. That's a spiritual law. And perhaps one of the things that you've been trying to do is to get where you want to go without real help. Oh, I don't mean that you won't let someone help you a little bit sometimes. But that's not the kind of help that we're talking about. That's the kind of help that you and I will permit someone to give us when we back into the ditch and spin our wheels and really can't get out, and we'll let someone come and help us just to get our wheels back up on the edge, and then we take over again. I'm talking about working with people, like-minded people, people who also know that they cannot get where they want to go without your help. And you know that you cannot get where you want to go without their help. People who are breaking out of the dark patterns of their minds and into the light. Most of you have read Napoleon Hill's great book, Think and Grow Rich. Mr. Hill made a very significant statement in the chapter on the mastermind principle when he said, "No two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third invisible, intangible force, which may be likened to a third mind." Now, this arrangement can work for good or for evil. The fact that two minds come together is not necessarily good. And that's why we have to be very careful about the arrangement, about the hookup that we make with other people's minds. Some of the most destructive arrangements that you and I have ever had are those 45-minute telephone conversations that we've had in the name of friendship with negative people. Those conversations that lead nowhere but use your energy in a destructive way in the name of good. That's why I suggested earlier that that kind of an arrangement needs to be stopped. Two people can rob a bank much more easily than one person can rob a bank. Let two bank-robbing minded individuals get together and you have there the same type of connection. But it is not for good, and it is not a mastermind consciousness. That's not the mastermind kind of arrangement that we're talking about. Now, if you and I are going to achieve the wholeness that we seek, the fulfillment of our spiritual condition, of this activity of spirit within us, and if we're going to experience this real movement toward our common goals, outer goals in life, experiencing living in increasingly more desirable forms. Is that not what you wish in your life, is to have an increase of all good in your life, more of that which is good outside yourself in visible forms, and more of that which is good inside yourself, more joy, more happiness, more wisdom, the ability to function better in all of your areas of responsibility? Would you not like that? Of course you would. There's something in you that hungers and thirsts and seeks and desires for that kind of an experience. Then if we are to advance into that experience, we must seek a conscious contact with an advanced state of mind, with the supermind or the conscious mind. In order to have this experience, we must believe that this dimension of mind does exist. And to believe it not just intellectually, but to become emotionally excited about it, to become enthusiastic about the possibilities that exist for me right now in this time span in my life, establishing and experiencing my own personal conscious contact with the source of all genius, of all good, and of all power, knowing that it can flow into me as my own inner experience and through me out into the world in a dramatic and dynamic way that will change any condition, any situation, for the good of all concerned. Do you really believe that that's possible for you? I know it is. I know it is, because I see it happening all the time. Again, Mr. Hill said in his book, no individual may have great power without availing himself of the mastermind. And he gave an example of a number of men and women who had become extremely successful by surrounding themselves with mastermind groups. For example, Mr. Andrew Carnegie's fortune was attributed by him to be the result of the power that he accumulated through the mastermind principle. And great power can be achieved through no other principle. You and I, and I'm being redundant purposely, have not really known that it was necessary for us to form such a group, a formal group, a group wherein that we deliberately, consciously, and regularly came together for the express purpose of experiencing the mastermind. Miracle is defined in the dictionary as an event or effect in the physical world beyond or out of the ordinary course of things, deviating from the known laws of nature or transcending our knowledge of these laws. But a miracle is a perfectly natural experience of the fourth dimension. A miracle is not unnatural at all. It is very natural, but it is supernatural. And in reality, miracles are events that take place as a result of the operation of a higher and previously unknown law. You see, all action in the universe is governed by law. Nothing just happens. Miracles have been and continue to be accomplished by anyone who will fulfill the law. And that is first the law of faith. But faith is not blind faith. Faith is the understanding of the law and continuing to believe and to know that our achievements will be a fulfillment of the promise of Jesus when he said, "He that believeth on me, he that believes these things that I tell him, the works that I do, he shall do also, and greater works than these shall he do." Now, the starting point of every act and thought and feeling is in the mind of man. Your mind is the common meeting ground between yourself and spirit and the activity that you wish to take place in your outer world. God is mind, and we cannot describe God. We cannot describe God with our words or with human language, and so we cannot describe mind. We can only say, "I am mind," and I know that God is mind, and that God knows, and that God is my own spiritual activity. Jesus Christ formed a mastermind group. Would you like to hear the story? As a matter of fact, before he achieved a single miracle, he established his mastermind group. The next day, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, "What do you seek?" And you know the rest of the story from John and Andrew, the first of the disciples. He then chose the other 10. Each of these disciples stands for one of our mind faculties or spiritual power. Peter stands for faith, Andrew, strength, James, wisdom or discrimination, John, love, Philip, power, the power of the spoken word, and so on through the disciples. The 12 disciples stand for the whole mind function in us called forth into its divine activity. 12, metaphysically, stands for the whole person. And you and I, as we call these 12 disciples into expression, are calling forth the wholeness of our mind, the fullness of our mind. But these disciples stood for even more than that. They represented in an outer way the kind of arrangement that each one of us must demonstrate in our own world if we're going to make our own spiritual demonstration. Now, it was after the calling of these disciples into a mastermind group that Jesus performed his first miracle. And that was the story of the turning of the water into wine. It's the second chapter of John, beginning with the first verse. On the third day following the experience of calling forth of the disciples, there was a marriage in Cana at Galilee. There was a marriage, a spiritual marriage. You will find that if you call your own mastermind principles, your 12 powers, into activity, but also if you will establish a mastermind group that you begin to work with, that shortly after that, like on about the third day, it may not be that long as far as time is concerned. It will be almost immediately in your experience. There will be a marriage. Your thinking and your feeling will be lifted up into a new experience. It is the marriage within you of these two facets of yourself. You will find a new direction. You will find that your thought will suddenly not be going one way, drifting aimlessly, and your emotions going in another direction negatively, saying, I cannot achieve my heart's desire. I wonder what my purpose is. Suddenly, there will be a marriage, a joyousness. Have you ever been in a real marriage where two people really were in love with each other, and all of her friends on this side of the church and all of his friends on that side of the church were really excited, and when the organ was playing and suddenly the music, here comes the bride, the minister says, will you rise? And the bride walks down the aisle and the groom stands here, and that place is charged with electricity. Have you had that experience? Have you been there? Has this happened inside yourself lately? Has an idea as represented by the groom, an idea of the kind of new life that you want to live, has that idea been standing here waiting for feeling to come forth and join him? It should. It will happen to you on the third day after you begin to have this mastermind experience, when you begin the process of calling forth your spiritual powers with other like-minded people. But you by yourself cannot do this. You yourself alone. And then at the feast following the wedding. Now, you probably thought that meant the reception. That's not the feast. The feast following this mystical marriage that we're talking about is the unfolding of these new and exciting events. The feast is the fulfillment, the feasting on the new good that God is bringing into your life. At that feast, a miracle takes place. And the miracle is the turning of the water into wine. The water of your life. Recently in your life, have you had the experience of believing that the party was over? Have you? The wine ran out. The party was over. Golly, wonder what I'm doing here. I wonder what I'm doing in my life. Where did all the fun go? There's nothing left to drink. The good stuff is gone. Have you had that experience? Well, the miracle is that this mastermind arrangement will turn the water into wine. It will take the substance at hand. It will take the events, the circumstances, the conditions, even the problems that exist in your life that you can equate as the water. It will take that substance of your life, the very conditions in which you now live, and will change them into a new substance called wine. And excitement, and joy. When the wine runs out, when our lives run down, when things just aren't going so well anymore, when the fun is gone, the party's over, Mary, the mother, the feminine nature, comes to us, comes to the Christ and says, in a very complaining way, they have no wine. The party is over. And the Christ said to her, "Oh, woman, what does that have to do with me?" That higher consciousness, that super consciousness, that Christ of you will turn to your feeling nature and say, "Shut up. What does that have to do with me? Be still. These conditions have no power. What does that have to do with me? I am from above." And you know what feeling or Mary then said? Oh. 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 And she turned to the servants and said, "Do what he says." And who are the servants? The universal powers, the forces in the universe, the creativity. Says, do what he said. But he must say something. And it must come out of this combined consciousness of like-minded people who are practicing spiritual principles in all of their affairs. Have you noticed how that maybe in one corner of your life, to the best of your ability, you're practicing the spiritual law, not always really knowing whether you're performing well or not, but in most areas of your life, you really are not practicing anything at all. Have you noticed that? We're going to correct that for you. And we're going to correct that for me. So that every facet of your world is going to come under the umbrella of the spiritual law on a continuing and regular basis. And the water will be changed to wine. And there will be a marriage, thinking and feeling, an excitement, a celebration, a feeling of strength, a feeling of peace. And the sense of the personal responsibility in life will pass away. And you will know, moment to moment, hour to hour, event to event, experience to experience, that you're being guided, directed, cherished, loved. That your life is under a new government. His government, filled with peace. And the abundance of things under that government will absolutely delight you and amaze your friends and confuse your in-laws. They will not be able to believe it. But they will not be able to deny it either. And in time they will come to you and say, "What is this thing that has happened to you. Could I belong to your mastermind group? Could I? We have a mastermind group here tonight. Can you feel the power of it? I can. The beauty of it. In our next lecture, we'll get into the how to form, how to experience that which the Father has in store.
This concludes the lesson on side B of tape number 1. Now proceed to tape number 2 for the continuation of The Mastermind Principle.